My name is Tavia Barnes. I'm the Executive Director of the California Infrastructure and Economic Development Bank. We are fondly referred to as iBank. You're welcome to do that. And you're fortunate because you have this opportunity as part of the deep dive session, and that's exactly what we're going to do, is do a deep dive as a follow-up to the plenary session that you just heard. So the first, let's move this. As you'll see, the first three questions should be familiar. They are the three questions that were discussed at this last session. This will be your opportunity to have your voice heard on those questions. It's not about us telling you what we think. It's about you sharing with us your thoughts, your answers to those three questions, plus some additional questions that Scott and I, would like you to consider as well. So before we begin, let Scott introduce himself, and then I would recommend that you pay attention to the fact that this is a live webcast. So think about what you're saying and that it's public, and your family and friends are going to hear this, and that might just be great, but I thought you just might want to be mindful of that red light.
And I think to clarify, we will shut down sales pitches. That's not really the place here. We really want to continue the conversation, and what an opportunity, really. Great timing by the governor's office to do this. There is a lot of exciting work being done in California, but I think to lead off of what was said in that last session, really where California's great opportunities are leveraging the industries where we really have excellence, leveraging data, biotech, bringing that into water, and the idea of opening up the industry and bringing new talent into the sector and providing the risk capital and the support we provide to other industries is critical here. So I will talk a little bit about ImagineH2O's experience in that, but really want you guys to drive the conversation. So I will weigh in accordingly. But this is a great opportunity because ImagineH2O's real mission is to inspire and empower people to turn water challenges into opportunities, and that's what we're doing today.
Thanks, Scott. So as we begin, we'll look at the first question. And I ask that you are each respectful of everyone else in the room, and that this isn't it could be, but we hope that it won't be an opportunity to give a speech, but to really address those questions so that we can have your voice in that report back to the governor's administration. So with that, what are the current barriers for introduction and scaling up of new technologies? What are your thoughts on that question?
Well, my thoughts are the fact that as an inventor, I can invent something, and it would be great, but I'm not an entrepreneur. And I also don't have necessarily the full focus of being able to understand exactly what all agencies need to be involved. What I need from as an inventor standpoint is someone that can actually do a project, who can cross all these bounds of all these bureaucracies and all of the other stuff that's going around. And if, as a central point of contact in the water industry, it would be great. You know the water industry. You can work with industry. You can work with the education field, to get a pilot program needed if it needs to happen that way. But we need to have somebody who can, you're not doing R&D yourself, but how can you foster that R&D by saying, this is what we will take upon the project management, if you wish, and we will help ferret out or find the good and the bad, but come to a good conclusion. If my ideas as an inventor isn't going to work, then you say, hey, we gave you guys a good shot. But there's got to be something that we can actually make that conversation to be able to bring it all together. I, as an entrepreneur, if I was an entrepreneur, I could go find an angel investor and convince him. But as an inventor, I can't.
So what's your name, sir?
Joseph Rizzi with Natural Desalination.
So Joseph, does anyone? Okay, we'll give this to you. So anyone have any ideas to Joseph on where he can go? Are there any angels in the room?
And I am looking at angels. That's
Right.
one of the things I'm trying to find. I'm also trying to reach out to educational groups.
Okay. Does anyone have an answer for Joseph?
Locally in the Sacramento area, the Sacramento Area Technology Alliance, SARTA, they have various programs for folks that are looking, that not only have incubators for technology, but also sources of funding. Again, in Sacramento, there are other VC firms as well.
Yeah, I'd say there are a lot of resources available to you. If you're looking for somebody with a business savvy, going to a business school, getting a graduate student involved, that's key. I would say one of the challenges in the water industry is you often have technologies looking for a problem, and the businesses that really succeed and have staying power in this industry start with an innovative financial model, almost more so than the technology. So getting the financial model and business plan down early is critical.
Anyone else have a response to the question, to the first question?
Yeah, to the first question, looking at kind of saying not to scale up necessarily as far as the technology scaling, but I'm saying scaling out to deploy. That's another issue that we have.
Can you explain that?
Sure. With local regulations, that there's an issue where there are state governments, federal and the federal government, the regulations are not in sync, and that causes issues with scaling out. And that's kind of on a larger scale. On a micro scale, we're in California. There are only 3 states in the nation that have regulations that are on a county level. And this came up in one of the other breakout sessions, is that if you have an approval in one county, it does not translate to any other counties. So it's virtually impossible to scale out in an economically feasible way. So, for example, with a new technology, I would have to approach 58 counties, 58 bureaucracies, pay the evaluation 58 times in order to put something into the marketplace, even if it is certified on a national scale. So
you've identified a problem. Any ideas on a resolution from your perspective? Maybe there's some answers here. Where's that mic? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, we're on webcast, so if you don't use the mic, we've got people in the internet that don't hear you.
Yeah, one solution was what people in the breakout this morning were talking about minimum standards, about best known methods, about encouraging counties to give them some kind of incentive, so to say, to subordinate their own idiosyncratic requirements to a generalized requirement, those kinds of things. So that you don't, I sympathize with you, you have to go around 58 separate counties. And if you sell into cities, by the way, sometimes it's even worse. So, it's that is a genuine hindrance to innovation. And if the state wanted to do something to actually enable innovation, one thing it could do is help that problem go away. It was exactly the same, by the way, with renewable energy, solar on roofs and all that kind of thing. Well, the solar industry and the energy industry, to some degree, has now addressed that. Well, now it's water's turn.
Yes, so my name is Sumair Johal. I'm an entrepreneur. One of the possible solutions could be creating some sort of a single window process, because we struggle with having very, very long cycles of RFPs, and sort of even knowing what RFPs are out there is just, as a startup, it's like a game of whack-a-mole, really, really, really difficult to manage. And then once we do get approved for an RFP, as another gentleman mentioned, replicating that is extremely difficult. So a single window acceleration process or agency that could be set up that could take water projects, be the source for funding all kinds of areas, and be able to accelerate these so that the time frames of adoption become weeks and months and not months and years. And that's really critical for scaling up the first one, in my opinion.
Scott, you want to go to, yes, sir?
Yeah, I made this point on earlier. I think there is a real need to differentiate between centralized technologies and decentralized technologies. This summit seems to be like 95% focused on decentralized, where I think about 25 to 30% of the people here have decentralized technologies, private on-site recycling. And at this point, I mean, even NSF International wasn't invited to this summit. And they're the national certifier of decentralized wastewater treatment systems. So I think we really need to have a decentralized summit separate from central, and the major municipal agencies can attend, but they should not be the major players.
So I think you've made that recommendation. I will hopefully it'll get us into the
NSF is
report.
here, and we did invite them, and there are some great decentralized on-site recycling companies out in the expo.
So regarding this issue of barriers for introduction and scale-up, it's a well-understood process in terms of, for example, DARPA process for taking technologies which are immature, proven in the lab, but haven't tried out in the field, or which have been piloted but not really demonstrated or deployed, and so on. So I would suggest the barrier is to, first of all, recognize that introduction and scale-up are not just two steps. What DoD has done is done the whole technology readiness level map, right, 1 to 9. Figure out where it is that we want to help these technologies move forward, and focus specifically on the water technologies for California, and put the money to move them along or drop them quickly, much like DARPA does if they fail. But we don't have anything like that for the moment.
Hello.
Can you identify yourself? Is this on?
Yes, my name is Michael Ross. I work for the Department of Water Resources, and I facilitate innovations across the state in this area, both municipal and on-site wastewater treatment, or any type of alternative water supply on-site. One of the barriers that you can have across all of this is the way in which we achieve water sustainability for human health and for the environment. It has to be both of those things. And right now, the state regulatory framework and the local regulatory framework needs to be supported by the legal responsible person that's on site. Usually that should be the user. So the best person and the most responsible person is when you have an owner of a property for legal property rights that is the user of the water and the reuser of the water, and is responsible for both themselves and the public's health and the environmental health. And that is the thread that if we put through here and we look at the barriers and help the local regulatory entities actually provide the oversight that they're responsible for to protect both the human and the environmental health, you'll find some of the solutions for both going across and up scale to provide water sustainability. And that is likely where you make a needle and a thread and start sewing up what's broken there. Okay.
So I think Scott's
Okay,
going
we'd like to move through our questions, but I think some of this is all recurring themes. But the second question is really, what strategies have successfully supported commercialization of water technologies? Are folks aware of some strategies that have been working?
Hi, my name is Margarita Colmenares. I'm an entrepreneur and educator. And I was at a water conference hosted by the Israeli Sister City program here in Sacramento, and I was very struck by the multifaceted approach that they take. It reminds me of what this gentleman over here said about having one small window that entrepreneurs jump through, but at the same time, they had, from the state, once you were vetted by the chief technology officer, you were placed into an incubator and you were given support that you needed. If you proved yourself, then they even helped you commercialize. So it seemed that at least in Israel, there's a process in place that maybe we need to learn from if we're going to set up our own U.S. version of what that looks like. I think the other concern that inventors have when approaching the state for grant monies is the control or potential loss of intellectual property or claims related to their technology. And I don't think it's really that clear or straightforward what you might be giving up in terms of risk if you decide to go down that path. And thirdly, in having worked in the past with the CEC, I know that they have funded research and development in the past. They have the EIGC program now, but I don't understand why, if we did something similar to that, but for water, it should not be small grants, because the solutions for water are not small, they are large.
Other thoughts on this topic?
They are large.
I would, okay.
I just want to push back on that a little bit. Jennifer Clary, Clean Water Action and Clean Water Fund. I'm actually interested in getting cost-effective solutions for small communities for arsenic and nitrate removal and now hexavalent chrome. And every time I hear from someone, it's something that's going to cost like $500 or $600 an acre foot, and that's not going to cut it for a low-income community. So you might think small as well.
One observation I might make is that government as a role as picking winners from a technology point of view doesn't have a good track record. I don't mean, just mean government in general as a process, whereas a government role in creating a market or helping to value an asset class in a market can stimulate and just allow, the technology and partnerships and good commercial models to prevail. So, in the energy market, there are a lot of good models where they effectively put a price on a megawatt or a negawatt and allow commercial partnerships and technology to fill the response to respond with solutions that drive to the best price performance.
Excellent point. And again, I think back to a mistake we often see entrepreneurs making in the sector is they don't find that beachhead market. And a government program is not going to do that for you, and it's not designed to do that. The laws of entrepreneurship and the market still apply here, even though it's water. And that point is critical to think of.
Thanks, Scott. I'm Wiggs Mendoza with Metropolitan Water District of Southern California, and I manage an innovation and technology program. And I've learned through the years, and probably we're the only one who has an innovation technology program. To answer question number 2, we have samples of Imagine H2O and WET that really supports commercialization. And I think the problem is understanding that technology and innovation is not the science behind it, but the entrepreneurship behind that innovation. So it's about how do you push that idea. An idea with a great science is just an idea. But an idea with a great entrepreneur can bring it to the market. So it's not only government, but it's all of us connecting with each other to understand how we bring that innovation into the market. SARPA, all the iHubs are there to help you guys, but we need to work with each other to break down those barriers. How can we break down a procurement low bid requirement when your innovations are not spec yet? Okay, we got to let the state know those are the things that we need to open some more. It seems like the supply and demand of this market, there's a disparity. There seems to be a large number of supply technologies. I believe there is, but they're not the right technology. It seems to be there's a small market, a demand market for when it comes to utilities. It's not really small. It's just closed. We talked about that in the last session because of the conservative culture. People don't want to take the risk. All of us should be working together, maybe with the governor, to see how we can break that down and see how we can make it easy. If we're really serious about innovation, we can't say, well, this thing works for the last 70 years. Why should we change it? We have different issues today, as the governor and everybody says. We have climate change, we have population, we have environmental. If we're really serious about that, we need to work together and not pinpoint at each other. Imagine H2O and WET are great, and SARPA are great segues into that market. Thank you.
I should add that WIGS is with Metropolitan Water District, largest water wholesaler, and they do have an innovation program. So when we think about new programs and what exists, great example of a large market player.
Yeah.
There's a person before you.
Yeah, and full disclosure, I work with Scott at Imagine H2O. What I wanted to point out is something from our friends across the border in Canada and the success that Ontario has had in creating a network of 900 water startups, a lot of which will eventually fall by the wayside, as is natural in any ecosystem. But really, they've demonstrated that this can be done. And I would point to a couple of things that they've done very well. Firstly, within the 2010 Water Opportunities Act, just a simple mechanism of requiring water agencies to put together a roadmap or at least a plan for how they're going to engage with innovation and how they plan to deploy innovation over the coming year. Just getting water agencies to think in that on an annual basis has made a huge difference. And then secondly, when you talk to customers for water companies, they say, mostly what they would say is, well, it hasn't been proved out enough yet. And what they've invested in is water test beds that shorten the amount of time it takes for water companies to be able to pilot their technologies successfully in order to say, so they can go back to the customer and say, look, we've got our 18 months, 24 months worth of data. This works. Let's put it in commercially. And if you see what Massachusetts has done, 10 million last year to provide 2 test beds, there's no reason why California can't be putting orders of magnitude more money to work in this state.
Final thought, and then we'll move on to the next question. Barry?
Barry Nelson, Western Water Strategies. One thought, urban water agencies in California prepare 450 roughly urban water management plans, and the standard drought for which we prepare those plans is for virtually all those agencies, not all, is a 3-year drought. We're now in year 4 of a drought. So virtually all of our urban water management plans haven't planned for year 4 and year 5. And if you look at what it's going to take to survive the ultimate inevitable 5-10-year droughts, it's new technologies that are going to allow us to survive. So a simple challenge for urban agencies, this could be done voluntarily at the urban level, or it could be required by the state, is to think not just for a 3-year drought, which is a smart thing to do, but also start looking at real long-term droughts, because that's going to force agencies to think about new technologies.
And I think perfect segue into our third question, and that is who implements these strategies and what role do agencies and local and state government play in these strategies? Peter.
I'd like to think, I grew up in a fairly unitary country, the United Kingdom, and I now live in a very federated country, the United States. And you've got to pick strategies that work for different political situations. You can't stamp your foot in California and say, do it. On the other hand, and those minimum standards would both consist of performance measures, so to say, in terms of levels of purity or levels of non-revenue water or leak detection or number of customers on smart meters or whatever it would be. And they can also specify or begin to specify the baskets of technologies that might help to get each of those companies, each of those agencies to move towards the minimum standard. This is the standard you've got to hit. Here are some technologies you should investigate that'll help you. And by the way, if you do use them and if you do hit the standard, here's some kind of incentive for actually having done it.
Matt Swindle, CEO and founder of Enline Energy. We do conduit energy recovery in our client base right now. Now. I'll start over. Matt Swindle, CEO and founder of Enline Energy. We do conduit hydroelectric energy recovery. We represent the Association of California Water Agencies, which are 450 municipal agencies. I think I'm going to respond to questions 3, 6, and 8, just skip ahead and just lump them together. If you have a technology that is fairly cost competitive and you have a willing client, one of the barriers that we see, especially for municipal agencies that move 90% of the water here in the state and have a lot of the potential, is how do you fund that? And what we talked to the comptroller, so you've gone through the flaming hoops and got up to the end. And many of these water agencies, if it's not a bleeding edge technology, have a propensity to want to own it. If they want to own it, you have a competition for funds for capital improvement program. You have to go out and do a new bond issuance. It depends on where you fall in that CapEx structure. I think one of the things that the state might want to consider is creating a fund for a technology class that addresses a particular problem. You could carve this up however you want. I'll plug iBank. iBank for renewable energy projects, small hydro. One of the things that you, well, good and bad, but we'll touch on the good. For a municipal agency that wants to build a project, there's the revolving state.
The infrastructure state revolving fund.
It's a program that you can go into, really not really a minimum, but no maximum. You can apply, and this is a way for a comptroller to a municipal water agency to finance their project off the books. They don't have to raid their capital improvement plan, anything else. I'll say the requirements to get the through underwriting are fairly severe. Even though we have high credit rated water agencies in California, a lot of them are suffering because of the recession and because of loss of revenue in the drought, and they're starting to get downgraded. So we have this departure from we have to put in technologies and fund projects, but you have a competition of funds, and you have ever increasing standards for lending because of the drought and loss of enterprise funds. At some point, that someone's got to make the call. We're going to make loans to these municipal water agencies for specific areas. If it addresses the water energy nexus would be my recommendation. We're going to fast track your application. We're going to waive certain requirements that are required, and we're going to get these projects funded. Now, if it costs $500 an acre foot, and if it's not cost effective, it's probably going to fail. But for those ones that do meet certain cut lines or, to Peter's point, minimum standards, let's get them funded and get them in the ground.
So I promised that I wouldn't. I just want to respond. At the back of the handouts is a clean center. So at iBank, or the later pages, next pages, I just pointed out to you, as iBank has just established is it not there, clean? Yeah, okay. So we have just established in the last 6 months, we're going to the board in August for final approval of a clean center that will be focused specifically, think of it as the green bank at iBank, and it will be focused specifically on clean energy, water conservation, environmental needs. And so we heard the demand, we're trying to address it, and that's all I'll say for now because it's really important to continue with the conversation. But you did jump ahead, so I just needed to, we can come back to it in a little bit. So back to you, Scott.
Yeah, just to follow up on Peter's comments, the state does set standards for quality for applications, drinking water, reuse, wastewater. What your idea of someone coming up with a performance standards for technologies to meet that is what agencies do when they get their treatment process when they get it permitted. And so if there was a state program where that is standardized, where you have data that's produced that can share with others, and I think IBM would be interested in something like this, that would be useful because people would see the data, see what else has been done, and that would fast track things. But you see that role that maybe nonprofits can play. Water Environment Research Foundation has a LIFT program which certifies certain that validates certain technologies. And I think a collaboration between state and some of these other organizations could get there.
Okay. Should we move on to the fourth question, which I think gets a little bit back to Jennifer's question, but what strategies should be considered to address the large disparity in demand and cost of water in different parts of the state? And I think I would throw quality in there to Jennifer's point.
Hi, my name is Sumer Johal. I'm the founder and CEO of AgriLogics. We are a big data analytics platform for water conservation for agriculture use. One of the ideas we often talk about with our stakeholders is some sort of cap and trade mechanism where conservation can be rewarded in an equitable way, kind of taking cue from the cap and trade on the greenhouse gas emission side of things. And it sort of has a double benefit of not only providing incentives for people to conserve water, but also creating funds for the innovation that can be had, and that's the disparity between demand and cost.
I'm Christian Olsen. I'm from Desert Control, and we have had a 100-hectare farm in Pakistan where we applied our nanoclay, which are flakes from clays, which are dispersed around all sand particles in the soil. And I don't know how we're going to penetrate the market, but there the yield gain has been 4 to 6 times on wheat. So I think that's probably the most interesting thing. But people or farmers don't believe it unless they see it. So we have to have the demonstration out to show them. Because I think when they see it in the field and they can feel it, then they want to have it before their neighbors are making more money than themselves for the same amount of work.
That's I think it's another question where we can learn from other countries, states. Ian?
Yeah. Hi, my name is Ian Parker. I'm with Goldman Sachs in San Francisco. And I wanted to first comment on 4, but then also touch on question 2 as well. Look, it's very difficult to sit there and try to figure out how to have sort of one price fits all in California, because every situation is going to be different. The geographies are different. The cost of conveyance is different. The water rights situation is different. And it just, nobody's going to tackle that. And anybody that does will ultimately fail. And so, it's a tough nut to crack. But I think that the one thing, and this is where I'm going to touch on question 2, if you look at, what strategies can help commercialize water technology? Well, the emergency drought that we're currently living under and the mandatory urban water restrictions, and I live on the peninsula, my community is forced to cut 36%. I think it's the highest in the state. And let me tell you, it's pretty amazing how all of a sudden we're having cocktail party discussions about shower heads and how to get, low flow shower heads. I mean, and honest God truth. And so when you have the penalty, when you start to cost what water costs, and let's face it, regardless of where you live, this water in California is still, one of the bargains of the world, really. I mean, if you compare it across all the sectors. So water costs have to go up. That's a tough one to deal with. And the comments about 218 are very important. But I think at the end of the day, the strategy is that you need to try to normalize the costs. And I think one way to, instead of trying to force the local change, if you started looking at, there was a beneficial use discussion on the panel, there's a lot of strategies that just don't have cash flow to support itself. If you put on a beneficial use charge statewide and then had a group that figured out how to allocate it so it's spread evenly across the population, and hopefully be able to have some basket that will help prove technology that may or may not end up happening, but also be able to get more reliability and sustainability from the very different agencies.
Any other thoughts on this question?
As far as number 4 goes, you got to put in the environment and the ecosystem, the fish, and the rest in the equation, and that's the missing part that most people don't put in there. Yes, you can have a cap and trade, but you also have to deal with the environment. And I've been working with the water storage folks, and they're grappling with this too. It's very hard to put in the non-economic or normal economics into the whole equation, and it makes it really tough. I really would like to see a specific party being able to be a central controller and to help out with the customers, sort of like Michael back there.
Basically on 2, there's an example from the wind industry. In the 80s, California rewarded investment in wind, and you could basically get 110% of your money back between the federal and state tax credits. Then we changed to the production tax credit. What gets rewarded gets done. And ever since then, it's been production driven in finance and every way. So we have the highest quality wind infrastructure in the world. And it turns out the Chinese are investing, subsidizing investment, and they have half of the efficiency of their wind turbines as we do in the States. So do reward what outputs you want to see, and that'll help a lot.
My name is Ed Velo. I'm with the Wexus Technology Group. And the conversation is very interesting in terms of who benefits, who doesn't benefit. But one of the things I'm sitting here concerned with when I hear that, cocktail parties and have conversations about shower heads, and in some communities, there are no shower heads. In some communities, there's no potable drinking water. And I don't see where and how the state is necessarily addressing this issue in terms of commercializing water and technology. Even though on all of the grants, you talk about disadvantaged communities and you talk about going into the hub zone and finding out where these people are. And I write grants and just finished getting one for $5 million. And did not include the disadvantaged because the information was so complex and you really couldn't locate these disadvantaged groups. And yet 15% of the monies that are going out through water technology and energy are devoted to minorities, but yet there's very little conversation about that. And I would hope that when the state start talking about commercializing, that they pay strict attention to two things. One, who's included. Two, what type of collaboration is taking place with these disadvantaged communities, and to what extent is the state going to fund those kinds of grants and proposals that address the needs of the disadvantaged community?
Very important point. Does anyone else have anything to add on that particular point? Amy?
So the California Public Utilities Commission has two programs for energy efficiency, and we're trying to incorporate water energy nexus measures into the ESEP program, the Energy Savings Assistance Program, and there are going to be ways that you could get involved with that at the CPUC, and I'll give you a card.
I'll also say that at iBank, when we do our infrastructure financing, and we will also include it with the Clean Center financing, the way we identify distressed communities is we look at the median household income and how it, so we don't look to identify specific people disadvantaged necessarily. We look at the demographics of the community in terms of the median household income and how it compares to the state average, and we look at the unemployment rate and how it compares to the state average. And for those communities that are, we call them disadvantaged communities, where their unemployment rate is significantly higher than the state average and their median household income is lower, we provide additional subsidies on our loans, our financings, the interest rate, to bring the cost down in the hopes that we get to a point where that community can afford to do that financing for that project. And we base it on where the project is located, because it's that project's going to help that particular community. So just wanted to answer your question.
Okay, we'd like to combine questions 5 and 6 here. There's been a lot of discussion about, well, what could the state's response be? Does that include starting a new Office of Innovation or something new? But there's a whole nother kind of question here, that there are a lot of existing resources available, and I'll pick on a few people in the room. But Stanford and Berkeley have their NSF-funded Renew It program, funded several $1 million. That's an important test bed in the state. The Wet Center in Fresno, excellent R&D facility and ecosystem and cluster for water tech companies. Utilities like EB Mud and MET have programs that are piloting and supporting innovation. Certainly our organization, with the backing of Wells Fargo and others, there are funded mechanisms in academia and the nonprofit sector, as well as some of these state agencies and initiatives. And how do we work within that framework rather than creating something new? And what examples from other countries could we plug? There was some discussion of Ontario and Israel. Are there other models that have worked in other countries or even in other industries? Okay, yeah, we have a new person.
Hi, I'm Lisa Butler from the American Water Resources Association. I would like to speak to the fact that we were talking about other programs in other sectors. So we heard about CEC and some of the things they're doing in energy. Also, the state of California with the LEED program and our building standards. The governor set some very high standards. There is a standardized procurement system that was pioneered by the Department of General Services. And now there is a way that local agencies can actually purchase using the purchasing criteria that's been set up by the state. And that's resulted in really large gains in the LED programs happening in California, really improving the LEED programs being improved, and it's improving building standards and energy and efficiency. So I think we could maybe look in these other sectors and start to just pull some of those really simple things, and existing infrastructure exists in state government to do that.
Yes, this is Sumer Johal again. Just an example from India. I grew up there, and in northern India, there's canal-fed irrigation-based agriculture, just like California. One of the ways that programs, innovations in particular, get funded is that there's a local village bodies that are empowered by the government to set up their own escrow accounts that are essentially monitored by the state, but they are funded by the local communities. So the local communities want to make sure that the oversight is there, so the money is not, wasted in non-appropriate ways. But the local entrepreneurs can then work at the village level to essentially get things done. And the model is not necessarily transplantable because we don't have that many villages in California. But the idea of having a oversight agency that can fund local contribution money from communities that are affected by that innovation is a grassroots sort of effort, which I thought was quite useful.
Hi, my name is Nika. I'm from the Israeli Economic Mission. We're a government agency for Israel, and we're based in San Francisco, and we're here to promote bilateral trade between Israel and the U.S. And it's very interesting because I work with a lot of Israeli startups who come to California learning about the drought and wanting to do business here. And one of the interesting challenges that they face is that in Israel, there's one specific office, the Office of the Chief Scientist, that has all these grant monies, is unhoused under one agency that helps with commercialization, with pilot programs, and provides grants for that. However, when they come to California, they're befuddled by, there's a lot of money that's out there, but they don't know how to find it or access it. And I'm imagining that other entrepreneurs and innovators are having this exact same problem, who's coming into the California market and looking at, okay, if I'm interested in doing a pilot program, where do I find, one, the funding to do a pilot program with a water agency with? And I think it's something that would be beneficial and helpful to a lot of entrepreneurs and innovators out there if, there's some sort of way to have everything housed or have one entity to, learn where all these separate pools of funding are coming from.
I do want to point out that there is the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development, fondly known as GoBiz, that could be a starting point for pretty much any entrepreneur in this room, particularly if you're having permitting issues, site issues, to start with GoBiz. I can't say that they will be the golden egg and answer all of your questions, but it would be a very good start, I believe, for those of you who have not heard of GoBiz before. They also have a brand new portal on their website that tries to bring together in one central place and direct you to the various agencies that may be helpful to you and what you're trying to achieve. And it was just launched last week.
Just a comment, another thing that works is nobody's been able to reproduce is Silicon Valley. But the core there was Stanford and Berkeley, really intellectual powerhouses. And there is no intellectual powerhouse I'm aware of similar in water. UC Davis has done it in agriculture, enology, and so forth like that. But trying to get something where there's a real core of where we have a brain drain coming into California.
Yes, Michael Ross, Department of Water Resources. And going back to question number 5, are the programs and resources available from the water agencies and local and state governments adequate? So we've heard all the way through the whole day that as far as municipal and then on-site, those two issues or those two realms, you have the State Water Resource Control Board and their 9 regional water quality offices, and their technical staff are challenged by their resources the technical engineers and the scientists to actually determine what is the best available technology to apply to protect both the public and the environment. So money, trying to get those programs supported and those individuals supported either through some type of national standard or state standard for what is the best available technology will allow them to apply the basin plans and the other implementation of the basin plans to try to meet our goals and challenges in California. And then on the local side, because the water board themselves set the criteria for oversight on public and environmental health to the local agencies, which we've heard a little bit about, and that is the public health departments at the local side, who are the 58 counties or cities, or even more than 58 counties, because it's each individual incorporated city. Those people don't have the expertise or the resources available to decide whether or not this new technology that wants to be commercialized can be employed at that house or that on-site place. So that is where I would think number 5, where the programs and the NGOs, the non-government organizations, can help by helping the government, help each person. And the number 3, who can implement the strategies? Every person can implement the strategy. And so we saw that in the industry of energy, when on-site energy, it was talked about, that it was up to the individual property owner to decide, I want to invest in doing energy. Well, if they can invest in doing a new commercial water technology that helps their on-site, then that's who has to implement it. So the resources should go to the 2 government agencies that oversight the public health and environmental health for water sustainability.
I just wanted to make a note too. I think from our questions, private industry has largely been left out, and I think maybe an oversight. If you go out in the expo, you'll see companies like Lagunitas, Kendall Jackson, Patagonia. You know, the private industry is willing to finance pilots with solutions that work, and also should be a solution. And sometimes they might even be working with a local municipality. So this idea of partnerships and pilots in the private industry is important. I would also warn, though, that entrepreneurs have the valley of death, but then they also have the valley of pilots. And we see a lot of entrepreneurs in the water sector get lulled to sleep going from pilot to pilot. They can make some money in each one, but it never really becomes a growth business that really scales and tackles a larger problem. So I think when we're thinking about any of these programs around pilots, getting the entrepreneur to think beyond the word project and really as a scalable business is key.
So I think we've gone through 7. I'd like to move to 8. We touched on 8 just a little bit. And being a banker myself, I almost hate to admit that in this room. I do think it's important, and I think the money piece of it's in the background on a lot of these issues that are coming up. And so I would ask, does access to financing for new water technology present any barriers? Financing, I'm thinking, lending.
I think as you consider that issue, you'll want to divide it into 2 classes. One is software and data, and the other is physical technology, whether you're talking about pumps or membranes or sensors or irrigation devices or whatever it is. Software, data, analytics, those kinds of things have one entirely different development path than the physical hardware. The problem for a lot of entrepreneurs, of course, is their invention requires both, and they've got to make them work together. But fundamentally, they're 2 different classes, 2 different sets of answers.
Any other questions on the first part of that? Or responses? You're giving us the answers, right?
I think that was a really good comment just now, and I'd like to build on that a little bit to say that, the water industry tends to have a much longer sales cycle than a lot of other industries. And so I think if we could have some good academic research about that fact, perhaps the speed of development of companies in the water industry versus other industries, and try to mesh that together with the right, let's say, mentors and investors that know what to expect and have the right long-term view. That's a lot different than you might see in a software industry. I think that would really help foster more investment.
Yes, Richard Harris with East Bay Mud, and I've been thinking about all the comments and all the questions, and it's really hard to settle on exactly what I want to say because there's so much, but I think the answer is yes and yes. And when you, and Scott, you and I were talking about this at another event, if you think about the GDP of the state of California, you look at the private enterprise, you look at the public investment, you look at the assets that we're sitting on top of, there's plenty of money. The idea is it feels like it's stranded in silos or sectors that we don't know how to access. And I probably can speak better to working with the end user. I manage the water conservation program, and the reason I say yes, yes, is it probably rolls back to data, measurement, and reaping what you can recognize. And it goes back to Metropolitan's Innovation Technology Program comment about there's a lot of good work going on, but either we're so busy with our day jobs or we don't have the common platform and the metrics that were being discussed earlier in other sessions about how we can easily tell a friend and access those success stories in a way that's meaningful to a local utility or a local end user. But the other challenge I see when I go talk to commercial, industrial franchisees is their own business model is not set up about where they get their CapEx or their operating budget. And they're not maybe willing to do something locally because it's handled in a corporate office or they don't see that immediate reward. And we actually hear that from M&I when we work with cities. So I'm not sure I have the answer, although we're interested in on-bill financing. We're looking at some other ways through not only the PACE program, but the pay-as-you-save pays and some other avenues. And I think there's an opportunity for the public-private partnership to leverage the data we have, the meter and the billing ability we have, but work with private financing to make that work. Case in point, we worked with a commercial business for 8 months to convince them to adopt a technology with an 8-week payback. And we decided not to give up. And it was a loss leader for us because we thought that would be a good thing. And the bottom line is the driver, the performance metric for that business and the access to information to tell the right decision makers was not available, so it just was not getting done.
Can I throw out the word that hasn't been used today? I haven't heard this word today, and maybe it was mentioned in a session that I didn't attend, but I haven't heard the word risk tolerance. I haven't heard the risk. We talk around it. I haven't heard anyone say it, and it is how your example just used is the risk tolerance. It sounds like how to get people to a comfort level where if they're going to succeed, really succeed, they're going to have to be willing to take on some risk, right? So how do you quantify that risk and how do you get them comfortable?
Well, that's actually what I wrote down on my page. I guess I should have said that first, but I didn't say it. So no, because it was said earlier, but we are a very conservative utility business. We are risk averse, but we have to learn how to manage risk better and manage decision making better. And from a utility standpoint, we have invested in our infrastructure and systems, and the challenge for us is whether it's a pilot and how to scale that pilot is systems integration. We're also very concerned about confidential data. It's really hard to get even the data from our customers to work with the third-party entrepreneurs. And so that has to be a partnership. And going back to what Michael said about the end user, when you're thinking about your brand and your public trust, what you really want to have happen is that the end user, who's your partner in actually monitoring this, isn't at the end of the day, if it doesn't work right, points the finger at the utility, and then we're going to be shy of getting into it again. So we all have to share some of that risk and that systems integration challenge, including the state, which works with us.
Just, again, Jim Walker with Focal Line Solar at the moment. If you go back to the success of California in the renewable energy area, you realize it revolutionized that industry. And only took 40 years. That's all it took, you know. So in that time, however, the R&D levels for clean tech versus clean water are about 10 or 15 times more for clean tech. So first of all, we're just not investing enough national resources in clean water R&D. And there's some very good statistics about that. Secondly, we have a completely fragmented customer base if you're trying to sell to this industry. Israel has done fantastic things, and they have a single national water company, Mekorot, that also has its own incubator. However, the utilities were very dispersed in the U.S. until they had the state renewable portfolio standards and some incentives. As a result, DOE does no longer need to fund turbine development because the turbine developers, manufacturers are estimated to have $1 billion a year of product development funding now, and they're self-sustaining.
Okay. We have 2 minutes. Oh, so, all right. Pass it on.
Can I make a quick question?
Well, some folks we haven't heard from, if you don't mind. And then we have 2 minutes to wrap it up. But go ahead.
Super speedy. Andrea Henderson, Wells Fargo Clean Tech. And one thing I do want to address on the financing comment is a big barrier at first is when you come out with a new technology, it's usually, and I'm a biosci undergrad, so there's a passion there, but it's usually born in science. And I think in order for that to grow into a financeable business, it needs to make business sense. And so I think there needs to be a lot more of an educational component or key to strategic partners or advisors that are going to advise to push the science in the right direction so that it makes business sense. And then it becomes this idea of risk, which I'm a banker, so afraid to admit that in a room too, but assessing the risk becomes easier when you're able to quantify and measure. I hear all these words around, but it's a very important component to breaking down these barriers to financing.
Right. I think the lady beside you, did someone else have a question? Okay. So in our last 2 minutes, actually we're over time, so 1 minute, if you will. Oh, no, go ahead. Go ahead.
Again, going back to the Israeli Technology Conference, I believe that when they addressed the question of risk, if I heard it right, I thought I understood that the state there guaranteed long-term contracts to the water that was being produced. And what that reminded me of when I heard it, it reminded me, oh gosh, that kind of sounds like a feed-in tariff, but for solar, right, for renewable energy. So I don't know, if we're putting ideas on the table, maybe we need a feed-in tariff for water.
Okay. So let me just respond. For the entrepreneurs in the room that have 750 or less employees and have projects or businesses, and you have a business where you need a loan of $20 million or less, iBank has a guarantee program, a small business loan guarantee program, to help you with that business financing. And I can tell you about that after this conference, but to put that out there. So now, lessons learned from the past, consider to move the water industry forward in California. And I've been in California for about 20 years, and my view of California is that we are the leaders of everything. Because it's hard, we tackle it, we take it on, we figure it out, we work together, and we lead. And this summit and all like this is just our pathway to get to that, where we'll be the leader. We will figure this out. I'm totally confident. We will figure this out because the mindset is already changing, just like smoking, water. The mindset's changing is how we view our responsibilities as a member of the community to the whole state when it comes to water. That drought is that important to us. And it's not just the people in this room. It's our neighbors. The fact that I have to think about filling up my pool and how much time I'm going to spend filling up my pool, just the mindset is different. So we'll figure it out. So I ask, what are the lessons learned from the past that we can use to drive us forward? Because we're going to figure this out.
Benicia salinity gates, putting up gates at Benicia can save or add the 7 to 40 million acre feet for all of California. It is not a project that I can do. It is something that the state has to do. I can bring it up to the state. I don't know who to bring it up to. It's nothing I will ever profit from, but it will benefit all of California. From 7 to 40 million acre feet being able to be used by California, and nobody wants to listen. And there's no way I can get anywhere in trying to talk with somebody.
So Joseph, I promise you, I'll talk to you after, I promise. Yeah, there are people in this room who will talk to you. What other lessons learned?
Funding Are we on? Funding projects and then not following them through. It's almost like developing a strategic plan, and then after you develop the strategic plan, the action was in developing the plan. After the plan is finished, it is now put on the shelf. The state is really guilty of creating some outstanding plans, but at the same time, those plans are not necessarily well disseminated, and a lot of good things are still on the shelf, and I think we need to pay close attention to what we fund, how we fund it, and the dissemination of that project, and particularly close attention to the dissemination strategies. We do very well on the front end, not so well on the back end.
Thank you very much. See you on the other side when we've gotten this all figured out. Thank you.